Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Thought I'd do a video on how to purchase a TH350 either for purposes of rebuild, in other words you're looking for a rebuildable core, or you're looking for a TH350 to install as is and run in your vehicle. So we're going to start out by making a couple of assumptions, and those are as follows. First, we're going to assume that whomever we're purchasing the transmission from either knows nothing about it or they do, and they're going to be purposefully deceptive or not transparent with you when it comes to its history and its condition. So you have to make those assumptions going in, just because it's best to do so to defend yourself and protect yourself from buying a dud. Okay, the second assumption that we're going to make is that whomever is selling the transmission is not going to let you partially or totally disassemble it to do an inspection before you buy. And that includes taking the pan off or the extension housing if so equipped, or anything else that's bolted onto the transmission, like say the vacuum modulator. It is extremely rare that you will find a seller that's willing to do that. Every once in a while you will, but it's not common, so I would not bank on that as being kind of part of the deal. So what we're going to do is walk you through some tips, pointers, and inspection procedures that you can follow to at least mitigate the risk that you buy something you can't use, something that's a basket case inside that will not work, and you're going to have to sink a boatload of money into it to get it to the point where it's actually rebuildable and or even drivable. So first thing we'll do is take a walk around the case, basically show you what you should be looking for structurally, and then we'll get into some mechanical or function tests, if you will, so that you can quickly identify when there's something really wrong inside the unit. So a couple of things you want to have with you, if at all possible, before you go out on your search, and that is a flashlight. This is a Surefire stiletto. This is what I carry every day. It is very handy. It has 3 different settings or brightness modes. So it's also USB rechargeable, so that you're not relying on batteries. You could just stick it on your charger as you need to, and it'll be fully charged at all times. The second thing you're going to want to have, if you have one, is a 27 spline slip yoke that would normally be found on the transmission end of your drive shaft. So you can get these from any driveline shop. Chances are you can find one good used for like 15 or 20 bucks. It's a great tool to have, and it's great to have with you if you were shopping for used transmissions. And you'll see how I use it when we do some of the functional tests. So now I'm going to reposition the camera, get a little bit closer, and I'm going to start walking through the inspection procedures that I follow so that you can perform them too, to increase the odds that you buy a transmission that you can use. Okay, first things first, you want to do a very thorough visual inspection of the case. Okay, given that these units are at their youngest, 40 years old right now, they've been through a lot. Chances are whatever TH350 you happen to be looking at has been through at least one overhaul at this point in its life. And so it's been taken out, been put back, taken out, moved around, and what's happened sometimes, unfortunately, is people either make mistakes, they're clumsy, they're not paying attention, and the transmission gets dropped on the ground. And where I see this kind of manifest is the bell housing area right here. So both sides you'll see cracks from this thing being dropped, either off of a trans jack or a floor jack, or whatever the case may be. Another area you want to scrutinize is the back of the case here. So this is going to be especially important if you live in a very cold weather climate. What will happen is that water will get into the modulator system, either into the vacuum line, or make its way into the modulator itself, or somehow through other points of entry, and then freeze overnight, so that when you go in to the next morning early to start it up and try to drive it, that water is still frozen. So the effect of this is a massive overpressure condition at the back of the case. And when you have massive overpressure conditions, all that pressure is going to be looking for a way out, and a lot of times it finds it by breaking the case, cracking it back here to relieve the stress. So you always want to be on the lookout for cracks, fissures, fractures, or even like oddball situations where one or more of the pan bolts is compromised. And I see that every once in a while, where there'll be a chunk missing out of the pan rail where a bolt is. I mean, any number of reasons could be at play for something like that, but I see it enough to where I would say it's somewhat common. All right. The other thing too is, if you can, either flip the transmission over or just take your hand and run it along the pan rail. Make sure you have all your bolts. Okay. You should have every one of these bowl hole locations occupied with a fastener. This one has like 4. It's a core. So if you're looking for a rebuildable core, don't be surprised if you have to go and track down a set of pan bolts, because most of the time, whoever takes the transmission in initially will take the pan off, and they will just put it, to drain the fluid, and just put it back on with a few bolts. The other thing you want to be mindful of, and this is why I suggest, if you can, get some sort of eyes on the bottom of the pan, is that if you're going to a junkyard, and when the junkyard takes the transmission in, a lot of times they'll punch a hole in the bottom of the pan to drain the fluid, because they're, I'm going to say too lazy to take the pan off, but I know why they're doing it. It's an efficiency thing. So they need to get the thing processed, inventoried, and put on the shelf as fast as possible, so that they're not dilly-dallying, and a lot of times they'll punch a hole in the pan. All right, that in of itself is usually not the end of the world, as long as you have all your bolts or you can track them down. Pans are relatively cheap for these things, and if you're doing anything performance oriented, you're going to want a better pan on there anyway. All right, next thing you want to look at is the extension housing. The two-wheel drive versions of these transmissions had, I think, at least 3 different output shaft and extension housing configurations. There was a long, a medium, and a short. This is the short shaft version. The extension housing itself is roughly 6 inches. So if you have like a dollar bill or something, you just stretch it out. You're looking at a short shaft TH350. If it's roughly the same length as the output shaft and extension housing. There's a 9-inch version. And then I believe there's like a 12 or 13-inch version. Those are relatively rare. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is perform some functional tests. All right, we've done a very good visual inspection. We've checked for, cracks, fissures, any signs of damage to the case itself. Now we want to see if we can draw some preliminary conclusions about the condition of the transmission and internal components inside by running some simple tests on the outside. So if you've watched any of my teardown inspection videos at all, you know that one of the first things I always do is yank on the input shaft. I want to push it in and pull it out, because what I'm looking for is end play. Okay, I want to see and feel this shaft move in and out by a modest amount. Okay, most of these TH350s have excessive end play, but this one is typical of what you might find. Okay, I'll flash the spec on the screen. For whatever reason, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but what you want to be looking for here is either significantly greater travel than what you see with this one, or no travel at all. So if it's bound, let's just say, no matter what you do, you're pulling on it, you're pushing on it, maybe even you have a small mallet handy and you tap on it and you don't feel anything changing as far as its longitudinal movement, then chances are this thing is bound up real bad. And it's bound up real bad because there's either been a gross misassembly error, somebody failed to set the end play correctly because they didn't know what the hell they were doing, or it sustained major damage inside, and as a result, you have now an interference fit between the front of the case, the back of the case, and all the internal components inside. So bottom line here, if it has way too much end play, i.e. travel, or none at all, you want to reject that transmission. Do not buy it. Okay, there's something seriously wrong with it. Alright, next do a visual inspection here of the seal, and as well as the lugs on the pump. So TH350s use a crescent style pump, and when you shine your flashlight in here, you should see 2 lugs. Okay, those engagement lugs mesh with the female engagement cutouts or lugs on the torque converter, and the torque converter then drives the pump, and the pump produces pressure. So let me get you a little closer and we'll show you what I mean. Alright, we got the flashlight on one of the two lugs. So there should be another identical lug on the opposite side. And unfortunately, I know the camera's not in position, but take my word for it, it's there. If you happen to have a checking tool with you, which I didn't even, mention that as a list of things to bring because most people are not going to have one. But if you do, go ahead and insert it and rotate the checking tool. All right, that will help you determine if there's any problems with the pump itself. So here's an example of a checking tool. This is designed to be used on 4L60Es and 700R4s, but you can use it on a TH350. In fact, this side is for 4L80Es. Let me see if this will fit. Yep, this is actually the better side. So what I'm going to do now is just simply rotate this thing. I want to go one complete revolution to make sure that the gear set inside this pump's not bound. It should spin nice and free. Okay, nice and free. Okay, a little bit better view. All right, if I can find it, I'll go ahead and flash a link to this tool on the screen and also put it in the description so that you can go and buy it and have it with you when you perform your inspection. And again, this is going to be useful for anyone buying TH350s, 400s, 4L60Es, 700R4s, 204Rs, and of course TH350Cs, the lockup counterpart to these units, and 4L60, 6570Es. And I think I may have mentioned one or two of those transmissions twice. So my kind of awkward delivery there aside, the point is you want to make sure that this pump is in good shape, because these are getting very, very expensive now to replace. Reman TH350 pumps, whether it be lockup or non-lockup, you're paying at least $250. I've seen them as high as $500, although that's kind of an outlier. Okay, I have a whole video on TH350 pumps, how to tell the differences and using casting numbers and all that to identify which kind of pump it is, and how to convert TH350Cs to non-lockup variants, if in fact that's what you want to do. So you can check that out. It's in the same playlist as this video is in, TH350 rebuild or something like that. But anyway, the other thing you want to check is make sure you have all your bolts. Okay, and the reason I say that is because if there's bolts missing, that means that the pump has been exposed in theory to elements. So moisture could have got in there, there could have been some reason and the bolts are missing. None of them bode well for your prospects when it comes to buying a transmission that you can either run as is or rebuild as a rebuildable core. All right, next thing you're going to do is check these splines. So you have two sets of splines here. You have the splines on the input shaft and the splines on the pump stator or stator shaft. All right, you do not want to see any wear here. Okay, wear comes in the form of a couple of different ways. So for the non-lockup versions, which is what we have, the splines go all the way to the end just like this. Then there's a short bevel, and then you have the terminus, and then you have your converter feed conduit. Okay, I'll talk about that in a second. But what I see a lot of times is these splines will either narrow, they'll be like very, very narrow in the engagement portion where this set of splines engages the female splines in the converter. And you'll see that visually in the form of differentiation here. It's obvious just looking at the splines. Get it maybe from a side view and zoom in a little bit. All right. So you want to make sure that you don't see any kind of deformation. The other thing that can happen, and it's true of all transmissions, is the splines can twist a little bit. And that's primarily due to an immense amount of horsepower being pushed through the transmission, an immense amount of torque. So in high performance applications, or really serious heavy duty where the engine's been built up, you may see this. The splines take on kind of a twisted appearance. So almost like a serpentine type look to them. So you want to be watchful of that, and then on the stator splines, you want to make sure that the splines are not either partially or totally stripped. Make sure they're not worn down to the nub. Make sure that the parts of the stator you can see, you don't see any fractures, cracks, or anything like that, any fissures. Okay, and same deal here. You don't want to see any cracking or fracturing on the input shaft itself. Obviously, if you see that, this transmission is no good, or at the very least, you know you're going to be into it for an input drum and shaft assembly. And again, with the TH350s, especially the non-lockup variants, parts are getting harder and harder to find. Therefore, you're going to be paying a premium for these parts. All right. While I'm zoomed in, I want to just point out something else real quick. So you may see parting lines like this. Okay, these are what we call parting lines in the casting. That's no big deal. This is not a crack here at the bowl location, and neither is this. Okay, make sure you can see that. All right, these are not cracks, so if you see that, that's fine. And you know, it's a little bit of scratching here, again, no big deal. The main thing is you're looking for actual cracks, breakage, etc., etc. All right, looks like the seal has been either replaced recently or it's just in unusually good condition. If you can kind of get your finger in here on the sealing surface, what you're feeling for is a very hard seal. Or any indications that the seal is bowed out, that would indicate that either there's been an overpressure condition inside the unit at some point, and the seal, or excuse me, the bushing may have walked, and if it's walking outward, it's going to, you know, apply pressure onto the seal, and that would imply there was a major leak here at the front of the transmission, which could have impaired the rest of the unit. So if you see something like that, if the seal's either missing, and the bushing is walking, in other words, it's been displaced forward, or the seal is cracked all around here, then that could imply, I'm not saying it's guaranteed to imply, but it could imply a big leak there at the converter. So another area that I'll kind of stress is the bleeder here. So I don't know to what extent you can get a flashlight to shine down in there. I'm looking at it now. I can see all the way down to the bend. So if you see a whole bunch of crud and debris caked inside of this bleeder, choking it off, restricting it, and not allowing venting of gases and water vapor and things like that, then that to me would indicate a problem potentially inside the unit. It could also indicate significant rust on hard parts, ferrous metals, gears, shafts, drums, etc. Most of the parts inside these things are ferrous. Okay, they're not aluminum. So if you see this plugged and there's a bunch of caked in dirt, and I don't know if you're going to bring a pick with you, maybe I should have added that to the list of things to have on hand. Let's just say it's, you know, you can't get it in any further than this, then I don't know if I'd buy that unit. So it's just something to look out for. All right, next thing you want to look at is the presence of all your fasteners and anything else associated with the transmission. So here you have a governor cover retainer clip, or at least it's provisioned for one. Okay, but obviously one is not present, so just know you'll be into it for that. And then the governor cover itself is going to be pretty much hard and fast to the case when it's installed. So like I said, we want to make the assumption here that the owner of the transmission, whether it be a junkyard or a private party seller or shop or whomever, is not going to let you start taking stuff off of it to verify X, Y, or Z. So that's where your slip yoke will come in handy. So you can do a couple of tests here simultaneously. So go ahead and install your slip yoke. It's 27 spline. And then what we're going to do is we're going to spin this shaft. We're going to spin it in both directions. We want to see and feel movement without any sort of bind up or galling or hearing any weird noises or anything else. Nothing interfering with this thing's travel as it's rotating both clockwise in the direction of engine rotation, which is this way, and counterclockwise against engine rotation, which is this way. Okay, it's going to be about 3 to 4 times harder to spin this thing counterclockwise than it is to spin it clockwise. That is just the way transmissions are designed. You're moving more internal components when you're spinning it counterclockwise. So this is spinning nice and freely. I don't feel any sort of grinding, binding, galling, parts not meshing together. An example would be gear train components coming apart, teeth being chipped off of the main body of, say, the sun gear or one of the planetary carriers or the ring gears. And if that were to be happening, it would feel either anywhere from like a bucket of bolts, a whole bunch of grinding, or the shaft would lock up. So it would be like this, you'd be spinning it, and then bam, it would lock up, and you wouldn't be able to spin it until you reversed your direction, and that would clear the obstruction. And what that is pieces of the broken gear teeth wedging themselves into the mesh from whatever's left of the sun gear, planet, and or ring gear, preventing further travel and further movement. So you want to watch out for that. If you're riding around in your vehicle and that happens to you, it feels like somebody just stuck a wheel chock underneath your rear wheels. The whole transmission just suddenly feels locked up, and then when you throw it in either reverse or drive, whichever is the opposite range setting, and it clears, chances are you have the beginnings of rear gear train or front gear train failure. So again, you want to check that, and that's why this is so helpful. All right, the other test you're doing at the same time is listening for movement in this governor. Okay, if you had, let's just say the governor had all of its teeth stripped off that little plastic gear on the end of it, you wouldn't hear the weights being actuated. So I'll go ahead and spin it again, and you can listen for the weights being actuated and moving. Hear that clicking kind of sound? Okay, that is the weights moving in response to centrifugal force that you are introducing onto that output shaft. If you don't hear that, and or you don't hear or feel anything coming from the governor, then it's a possibility that the plastic gear has all of its teeth stripped off. The other possibility is that the governor seized. And that's actually the more concerning condition of the two, because the governor valve has to be allowed to move freely inside of its bore. All right, so let me demonstrate on a 700R4 governor, which these are not the same as a TH350 governor, by the way. You can't just interchange them as is. You have to modify them to work in the other application. But let's just say all of these gear teeth are stripped off and the valve is stuck and seized. Number one, visually you'd be able to tell there's nothing there on the gear, but more importantly, when you're rotating that shaft, which you see in front of you with that valve moving like this and the weights making a little clicking noise, would not be happening. TH350 governors are getting very expensive, even good used ones. Like I see them selling online for like $75, $100. And you still have to go through them anyway. You still have to take the valve out, polish the internal bore, smooth the valve, and then install a new gear. So, that's, I don't know, another $20 into it plus your time. So it's very important to run this test so you're not spending more money. Again, the assumption here is that either you want to do this purchase for the purposes of rebuilding it, or you want to run it as is. Okay, the third test that you're performing when you spin the output shaft like this is to evaluate the condition of the low roller clutch assembly. These transmissions are very vulnerable to failure in that low roller clutch inside the center support. So in addition to the clicking and clacking that you heard, you also heard kind of a screeching sound, right? So what that screeching sound is the sign of a healthy low roller clutch. Hear it? It's coming from right around in here in the middle of the case, hence the term center support. All right. Now, if you don't hear this, but everything else turns just like it should, that would still imply that the low roller assembly is holding and working. If not, if it's turning, a little too freely, going counterclockwise, then it could imply that low roller clutch has failed, or if it won't turn at all, or you hear all kind of grinding, binding up. Again, it could be low roller clutch failure, which is somewhat common in these. The low roller assemblies in these transmissions are a little undersized, in my opinion. A popular upgrade for addressing that concern is installing a 4L60E or late 700R4 center support with the much wider roller assembly, and that checkmates that issue. All right, so now we've spun the output shaft, we've evaluated the condition of the governor, at least to the best of our ability. We've confirmed that the shaft will spin and rotate 360 degrees in both directions. The feel of the amount of force we had to apply to get it to move was about right for clockwise and counterclockwise. Like I said, counterclockwise it's going to be 3 to 4 times harder to rotate. That's perfectly normal. So far so good. All right, so we're going to put this back in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start rotating the input shaft while we hold the output shaft in place. Okay, and I should have mentioned this before, but I guess it was so common sense I didn't. I skipped right over it. But make sure this is not in park, because if this is in park, you're obviously not going to spin the shaft. Now, I guess another good test to do is if you put this in park and it still spins, well, that means that the parking pole has been destroyed or the parking gear is destroyed. So, as I'm thinking about it, that's another test that you should perform. Okay, so I'm spinning the input shaft. It's spinning nice and smooth, no issues. And the main thing I'm looking for is when I spin this shaft, I do not want to have rotational forces or stresses trying to force my hand to allow the output shaft to spin. That would mean that the two are bound in some way, shape, or form. And if you know anything at all about the internals of the TH350 and the architectural layout of parts and components, you know that that should never be possible. So if it was, then you would move in either one direction or another when you're in park or neutral. That would be a major problem. Sometimes the forward clutch will weld itself together. So, if you have a situation where you're spinning the input shaft and that output shaft spinning in a one-to-one relationship, or some relationship to where it is definitely mechanically bound, then it could be forward clutch being welded or some other serious problem inside the case. All right, same thing, output shaft, you could spin it and then hold the input shaft. You're just doing what I refer to as a two-tail test. You have one tail here, one tail there, spin one while holding the other, and then reverse, reverse your pattern. Either way, the end result should be the same, okay? These shafts should be able to spin independently of each other without any binding. All right, let's get this out of the way. So we've completed our tests of rotating assembly. So other things that we want to look for are the presence or absence of a speedo gear. This is no big deal other than that moisture and elements may have gotten in here, so it is something to consider, but it's not really a showstopper. You can purchase the Bullets style speedo housing and the little retention bracket and grab a fastener in most hard parts places. So you have a local transport supplier, maybe it's a Transtar distributor, they'll have all that stuff, or you can order it direct from Transtar or Transpart's warehouse or find it on eBay. Same with the Speedo drive and driven gears. Okay, you can readily order that stuff, so you know it's not expensive. The presence or absence of the Speedo setup shouldn't deter you, all other things equal. Okay, let me stay on this side real quick. So another thing that these transmissions can be vulnerable to because aging electrical systems is electrolysis. All right, so if you can scrutinize the selector shaft and you notice that there's like a whole bunch of discoloration here, maybe it's greenish in color, what that is electrolysis. Electrolysis is an electrochemical transfer of material due to short to grounds and or the electrical system of the vehicle grounding itself on the selector shaft. So if you see that, I'd be really leery about buying this because that could have adverse downstream impacts to parts inside the transmission. Okay, if you're at the junkyard and you can pull the TH350 out and like everything's all together, including the drive shaft, when you pull the drive shaft off, inspect the slip yoke. So on the slip yoke, if you see a whole bunch of bronze looking material on here, that's the bushing, matter from the bushing or material from the bushing chemically transferring from the bushing to the slip yoke. Again, it would indicate the electrical system improperly grounding itself on the drive shaft. So you don't want that, obviously. I'll put this thing over here, it's making noise. All right, vacuum modulator. If the modulator is missing, and if you have a pencil magnet, again, another tool that you probably should have with you, just generally speaking. Here's an example of a magnet, okay? This is a magnetized screwdriver. You can go in and see if you can withdraw the vacuum modulator valve. So the modulator valve is your locus of control for line pressure. The modulator system is integral into managing transmission function. It's really part of the transmission's brain. If we consider the valve body, the brain, the modulator system, and the kickdown or detent system is almost like the spinal cord, right? So this regulates line pressure inside the transmission, and you must have a healthy amount of vacuum for this thing to function properly. So one of the problems that folks will have is corrosion, grit, dirt, dust, whatever, getting into this bore here, or a failure inside the unit causing, very fine ground up metal to accumulate in the bore, and that will cause the modulator valve to seize. If it's stuck, if it's seized, you can't get it out, again, I'd be concerned about what you might find if you open it up. And if you're going to run this as is, that is your plan, then I would probably not buy that transmission if it has a stuck or seized vacuum modulator valve. So it's important that the modulator be present, not because you're going to reuse it. I would purchase a new one, but because it protects the valve and internally, the rest of the interior of the transmission from elements. All right, next thing you're going to do is grab your flashlight, and you're going to start shining your flashlight here into the dipstick tube, and if you can, into the kickdown cable location. So it's going to be difficult to see a whole lot, especially if it's full of fluid, but if it is full of fluid and you have a good flashlight, you'll be able to clearly see if there's matter or crap or crud floating in that fluid. If it's all black, or you see like kind of a shimmery, shiny, silverish kind of appearance to it, that would indicate a major failure has occurred inside the unit, and I'd definitely not buy it. You're not going to be able to see much. I mean, you can see a tiny, piece of the valve body here along the side, but again, it's not going to, you're not going to be able to discern anything about the health or condition of the filter or the valve body or anything like that. But the main thing you're looking for is debris, kibbles and bits and things like that. Now, if you're buying a cord at a yard, they more than likely drain the fluid already, and they may have even taken the pan off and wiped the pan down so that any evidence of major failures has been removed. So you need to be on the lookout for that. So if the pan looks squeaky clean, that should be something that should cross your mind. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy the unit just because of that, because if everything else checks out, all your mechanical and or functional tests you're doing with the shafts don't indicate any problems, then chances are they just simply wipe the pan down and that's it. You know, Occam's razor. There's nothing to be worried about. All right, next thing you want to do is come to the 1-2 accumulator housing here. Okay, this is the 1-2 accumulator bore. There's a 1-2 accumulator piston in here. There is a return spring on this side of the piston, and it's applying spring pressure on the back side of this cover. So, if this is missing, that would concern me a little bit, again, because elements are, you know, allowed access into the case. But a lot of times these will come in with a broken 1-2 accumulator spring. So what you can do is just take a little bit of pressure in your thumbs and you can force it inward. Okay? If you can force it inward, you don't need to force it in all that much. I mean, what I'm showing you here is really sufficient. That tells me that the spring is intact and it appears to be working as it should. A broken spring here is very bad news for an otherwise stock transmission with a stock converter in a, you know, any application at all, really. Here's what happens when this breaks. If this spring breaks or somebody modified it. Like, for example, if somebody cut 2 or 3 coils off to get a much firmer 1-2 shift, then this, you'll be able to push this in a lot further than I am by hand. So if you're pushing this in and you're able to, you know, compress it by maybe 1/4 of an inch or something like that, or even a 1/2 inch, that means somebody modified the spring, or it's broken. You know, maybe a top third of it broke off. So either way, the effect is the same. And that is an extremely harsh 1-2 shift in a factory stall. So what will happen if this doesn't go, or if this doesn't get corrected, if it just is allowed to remain damaged like that or modified when it shouldn't have been? You're eventually going to crack your intermediate roller clutch assembly's outer race. Okay, that is probably the single most common pattern failure in these units when it comes to hard parts. It's that outer race. Every transmission I build, TH350, 350C, receives a Sonex heavy duty outer roller clutch race. Every one of them, without exception. I don't care if the engine has 5 horsepower, it's still getting one of those. So if this is modified, it could imply issues with the intermediate roller clutch assembly. And if that breaks, you don't have second gear. And that's honestly, I mean, not having second gear is the least of your concerns, especially if you know how to rebuild these. You can just go in and, you know, do it right. You know, what you really need to look out for is damage to the case or other harder to find components. So be on the lookout for that. Test this, make sure that it has spring force, and what you saw me do, the amount of travel that this thing has, is correct. All right, cooler line fittings, these are everywhere. TH350, 700R4s, 204Rs, they all take the same fittings. You know, you can buy them pretty much anywhere auto parts are sold. All right, let me see if there's anything else I want to discuss. Anything else you can do to check on things. You know, with the transmission like this, not, you know, to where you can take stuff off. If whoever is selling the unit will allow you to do some, I guess, probing by removing things like the governor cover and the pan, or they offer it, absolutely take them up on it. Absolutely. You want to see as much as you possibly can before you buy. All right. These cores, I mean, I guess it depends on where, you know, where you're located and, you know, what the market demand is for them, but I'm starting to see them creep up in price. I used to be, you know, up until about 5 years ago, I mean, you can get one of these almost for free. They were readily available in all the wrecking yards. Hard part suppliers that take in cores always had a whole bunch of them. They just couldn't get rid of them fast enough. But I've noticed, especially, you know, post-COVID, there's been almost like a run on these. So they're getting harder and harder to find, and we're starting to see prices, you know, creeping up towards $300 for a good rebuildable core, especially a 4x4 unit. So a 4x4 unit, you know, 4x4 from the factory is going to have a much thicker flange down here on the bell. Okay, they're a little bit different, and they are getting very hard to find, and you expect to pay a premium for them. So if somebody's advertising a TH350 for sale, and they are claiming it to be a 4x4 unit and it's configured as such, the first thing you want to look at is this area in here. Because if it looks like this, it's not a 4x4 unit. At least that's not how it started life. It started life as a 2-wheel drive unit that somebody had converted to a 4-wheel drive application at some point in the past, and you're paying a premium for nothing. All right, I think that's about it. If there's anything else that I'm missing that I can think of after I film this, I'll either splice in a video clip like I sometimes do, because, I mean, let's face it, off the top of my head, I sometimes will omit stuff because I didn't think about it, and then it occurred to me later when I'm editing the video. I'll go ahead and put it in, so, you know, if you saw something like that earlier in the, you know, in the video here, that's what happened. Line pressure taps, make sure that they're all there. Again, same deal. You don't want to have missing pressure port plugs, if at all possible. I mean, fasteners other than the pan bolts are important. You can usually get that bolt there for the modulator. Some of these real old units, they won't have a modulator like this. This is aftermarket, or it's, you know, been replaced. They'll have a very large can or canister style modulator. The factory went away from those sometime in the early 70s. I don't remember what year, but, you know, you may see that that's normal. That means that that's the original factory modulator. Some of the TH350Cs also had the modulators that were kind of big, outsized. The TH350 non-lockup was in production from 1969 through 1979. Now, those are the model years. The 350Cs, I believe, entered production in 78 and went out of production in 84. The TH350Cs, you can differentiate them readily visually by the presence of a pilot on the end of the output shaft. It looks like a 700R4's, I'm sorry, input shaft, not output shaft, input shaft. It looks just like a 700R4. So if you know what a 700R4 looks like, and you're, you know, looking at the input shaft in the end and it looks just like that, then you know you're looking at a TH350C. Conversely, you just come over to the side of the case on the driver's side, and you'll see a plug here. I think it's a three-prong plug, or pin plug. That is for the torque converter. The TH350 non-lockup is 100% mechanical. The TH350C is what we refer to as an electromechanical transmission, meaning that it uses a combination of electric input signal and mechanical function to work the converter clutch. So I got, again, videos on the TH350Cs, so if you want like a lot more information or want to do a deep dive on those, feel free to check those out. Converting a TH350 to 350C probably is the best video to find that information. And I think I have a teardown inspection too on a 350C as well. All right, as I'm moving this thing around, rotating on the bench like this, I'm trying to think of anything else that I could tell you, but I think I've kind of covered everything that I need to cover here. So to recap, look for structural defects, damage to case, especially back here, especially if you live in cold weather climates. Be on the lookout for that. If you have a case that's completely caked with mud and dirt, and it, you can't get eyes on significant fractions of the case, I'll be honest, I'd probably pass it by. If nothing else, or no other reason, it's going to take you a month of Sundays to clean it, unless you have a super duper industrial strength parts washer, which if you're a DIYer, chances are you're not going to have that. Even I don't have that. I have a parts washer, but it's not super duper industrial strength where it can take a TH350 with like an inch layer of mud and grime and turn it into like something that looked like it was mopping load. So that'll do it. As always, I really appreciate you watching. If you have any other questions, or if you think I missed something where there's another tip that you have, please put it in the comments, because again, we're trying to crowdsource knowledge and information and kind of share amongst ourselves here in the community for the betterment of everybody. So don't hesitate to let me know that I missed something and kind of specify what that is. Until I see you on the next video, which I'm looking forward to seeing you, take care, enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and as always, I really appreciate your support. Thanks again.